Or in the Mishnah on the top of Tzadi Chesam Beis. Hamoicha Makom L'Chaver. V'chein HaMakabel Makom L'Chaver. Las LeBeis HaChanus LeBnoy Beis Almonos LeBita. It's all one phrase. Someone who sells a place to his friend, or someone who agrees to build for his friend, the contractor, to make for him, well, what is he agreeing to provide a place for, to build? To make a base chasnus l'bnai, a small addition to the house for his son to come after he gets married. Or base almanus l'bita, or his daughter, if her husband died and she's now going to have to move in, to make what they call now a mother-daughter. It's usually the other way around. That's like when the shviga comes, you have to make like a little apartment. So you agree to make such a extension for one of these two reasons. You build something that's 4 amas by 6. That's either 6 by 12 or 8 by 6 by 7 by 8. What would it be? 6 by 9 or 8 by 12, depending on the amas, 1.5 feet or 2 feet. So it's a pretty small space. Divrei Rebbe Akiva. Rishmol Eimer Revis Bakar Hiza Zu. This is basically a stable. This is not a place for a human being. It's too small. And he disagrees with that shita, with that shear. The Mishnah does not say what Rabbi Shmuel's preferred amount would be. Someone who wants to build a refes bakar, he builds this amount that we just said, 4 by 6. The Gemara is going to explain whether this is part of Rabbi Shmuel's question or Rabbi Akiva is continuing. Bayis cotton. If someone agreed to build a small house, or he agreed to give the place for a small house, the Rashbam explains when we say bayis cotton, he just said bayis stam, and therefore he's allowed to do the minimum amount. So this is the bayis cotton. Before we talked about particular circumstances, we were talking about a beis chasnus l'bnai, where he's making something for his son to move into after the marriage, or for a daughter who's an almana, who's a widow. So those are specific extensions. But a standalone house, if he says standalone house, that means the smallest, the person who agreed to provide the land or agreed to build it is only obligated to do a minimum. So bayis cotton is sheish al ches, 6 by 8. Gadol, a large house, ches al eser, 8 by 10. Traklin, a traklin, the Rashbam teaches as a outdoor, like a porch for rich people. Yud al yud, it's 10 by 10. Was it? The Rashbam says traklin the Moshe Sam Asulai the Loila Tashmish Hilchach Maruba Beina. It's interesting. He says it's not used. It's not for use. It's for beauty, for them to sit around, for fancy people to sit around, and therefore it's 10 by 10, because a square was considered more aesthetically pleasing. A rectangle is more practical, but a square is more looks prettier. So when you say a traklin, the person, the matron of the house, the wife, is certainly going to want it to be square. The height of all of these different buildings are equal half of the length and half of the width. So, for example, if you have something we said the first thing is 4 by 6. So half of 4 is 2, and half of 6 is 3. So it'd have to be 5 amas high. It sounds very high to me. I mean, not objectively high, but for that size room, it sounds high. Again, the Gemara is going to say what this means. Is this a really just a riot? It sounds like it's saying it's bringing a riot from the Heichel. The Heichel, what did the Rashbam say? What did the Rashbam? Binyan Heichel al pnei hadvir haya archai umem haya archai mem. It was 40 amas long, v'rachvai esrim, and its width was 20. V'rumay shloishim, and its height was 30. So if you take 40, half of 40 is 20, and half of 20 is 10. It equals up to 30. So you see by the Heichel, it was 30. So the Gemara will argue about exactly whether this is a raya or this is a kasha. So the Gemara, Lomali lemisna beis chasus lebaya beis almanos lebitay. Listening beis chasus lebnay lebitay, beis almanos lebitay lebnay lebitay. Why does it say only if you built an extension for your son to live in after he gets married, and not for your daughter? As well as, what if a son loses his wife? Why would we just say if a daughter loses her husband, so she moves in, but it doesn't say that for the son? Right? If the son needs a place to live after he gets married, it seems that the men were not any more independent than the women. So why wouldn't we expect him to come back also? So Dr. Milsa Agav Orcha Kamashman. It's not typical, it's not even appropriate for a son-in-law to live by his father-in-law. And the Gemara, the Rashbam explains, because of there's a chashash, which we've seen this before in the Gemara. I think we had this legabi, like who hates each other, but there's a chashash that a mother-in-law and a son-in-law will, if they live together, will come to act promiscuously. So where do we see this? Like it says in this Sefer Ben Sira, this is a book of aphorisms. Hakol shekalti b'kaf maznayim. I measured everything, all materials, and there was nothing that was lighter than subin, meaning of less worth than subin. Subin is the least worth thing. Chasan hadar b'beis chamav. I'm sorry, did I? Yeah. Chasan hadar b'beis chamav.
But then he says you skip one, the kalmi subin.
The kalmi subin, and even lighter than that is chasan hadar b'beis chamav. Is a chasan that lives in his father-in-law's house. The kalmi chasan, and even less than that, meaning even worse than that, is a oirech machnes oirech. Someone who brings a +1 without being asked to do so. Someone shows up at your house for Shabbos, and you invited him, and you gave him a room, and he says, "Oh, I brought along my 14 kids." The kalme oirech, and even worse than that, is a meshav dava b'terem yishma. Someone who answers something before hearing the whole question. Should have a meshav dava b'terem yishma, avolasi v'loi v'klima. It's someone who does so is very foolish, and he should be embarrassed. Revis Bakr Hizu, Haroitza Lases, the Mishnah had said that a base chasnus and a base almanus, the standard, the Tanakh had said it's going to be 4x6. And Shmuel said Revis Bakr, this is a barn, this is a stable. Revis Bakr Mang Tanila. Who's saying this din of Revis Bakr? Ikad Amar Bishmok Tanila. When the Mishnah continues on, it says that a Revis Bakr is Dal Ram Sal Shesh. What Manoma says it's Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel had objected to Rabbi Akiva, who said you could build this extension of 4x6. He said that's a Revis Bakr, and then the Mishnah continues on to say if someone agrees to make a Revis Bakr, this is the amount. Some people say it was Rabbi Akiva who had said this Divrei Rabbi Akiva, that it said that you build an extension of 4x6. He says that if someone says a Revis Bakr is 4x6, Rabbi Akiva said, nevertheless, if someone is only making a small extension temporarily for his widowed son, or for his widowed daughter, or for his recently married son, he'll make a small extension. Some say Rabbi Shmuel. He's coming to say that means he's not coming, Rabbi Shmuel is coming to say that while I just said that you don't make an extension of 4x6, but a Revis Bakr you can. Mashenka Rabbi Kiva was just saying that how much is it that you make when you make a base chasnas or base almanus, even though Rabbi Shmuel objected, it's like a Revis Bakr. I'm telling you, a Revis Bakr is 4x6, so it's not a Einachanami. Sometimes they are the same amount. So Traklin Yud al Yud makes a Traklin Yud al Yud. My Traklin, Kufsa Bevardi. It's a like a garden of roses, a little a place for the lords to cavort. Tani ukanter shnayim eser al Yud base. A kanter is 12 by 12. Even though we had before, a kanter was like we had a similar word that meant a slave, an eved, who does surveying. This is a different one, I guess, similar word. My kanter, tarbet zapadni. It's the garden of a mansion. Rumay kechatzi arkoy kechatzi rachboy. We said a house has to be, the height has to equal half of the length and the width, added together, and a raya l'davar is from the heichel. Morning, and sadich has some base. Raya l'davar manktani lo. Who is saying this raya l'davar? Ikadam Reb Shimon Gamliel ktani lo. Some are saying it, understood the Mishnah as saying, but this is Reb Shimon Gamliel was saying it. V'achikab raya l'davar minayin. Amar Reb Shimon Gamliel akol kabinyan heichel. Reb Shimon Gamliel was coming to say, just like the binyan heichel is like this. That's what everyone had. Reb Shimon Gamliel said that you do it kabinyan heichel. Reb Shimon Gamliel it's muya kametama. V'hachi kamalei. Reb Shimon Gamliel was asking a kasha on the Tanakam. You say that it's the height is the same as half of the length and half of the width. Why you bring a raya of how people build their houses from the heichel? The heichel was the most beautiful, the biggest binyan, the most important binyan in Eretz Yisrael, in Yerushalayim. That was made specifically very high. A normal house is not as high as that. To be honest, it's very, very hard to understand if you have. We said, let's say, a bayis gadol is 10 by chasal eser. That's 4 plus 5. It's 9 amas. Even according to the shorter amount, 9 amas. If it's 1.5 feet, that's 13 and 9 feet. 9 amas. Sorry, eser. Right, 9 amas is 9 plus 4.5, 13.5 feet, which is very high, I would think, for a house. Tanya, others disagree with our Mishnah. We have a brisa that disagrees with our Mishnah, and they say the height has to be like the beams that go across the house. Why is it saying like the beams? Why don't you just say that the height is the same as the width? Why are you specifically saying the beams that go across that hold the roof up? Just say the width. You might say that a house, when you build the walls are built. They don't go straight up. They're wider at on the bottom. They built them out of stone. So at the bottom they could be 2 feet wide, and then on the top they would narrow to 1 foot. So if you measure the width of the house on the inside, since they're 2 foot thick walls, so it would be a little bit narrower, the width of the house in between the walls. But if you look at the top where the beams are, then it would be a little bit wider. So that's why it says the beams, so you don't get mixed up based on the thickness of the walls on the bottom. Some say because the beams didn't just go to the inside of the wall. There had to be indentations in the wall to place the beams. So we wanted to have the height equal the entire beam, including the part that was inserted into the wall. If you just did the width of the house, that would just be the opening. It wouldn't include the places where the beam goes into. It would just be the distance between the two walls. The Gemara doesn't assume that width would include the walls from the outside, because then I guess it wouldn't, even if it gets narrower, it would get narrower on the inside also. Rav Chanina Nafik Lekraisa. Rav Chanina went to learn Ramule Kreyadadi, and they asked him a stira between the psukim. The entire Beis Hamikdash was 60 amas long and 20 amas wide and 30 amas high. This is not just the heichel. This is the heichel together with the kachei kachim. Before when we said that it was 30 amas long, that was just 40 amas long. I'm sorry, was the heichel. The heichel was 40. The kachei kachim was 20. So between the two of them, it was 60 long. 60 long. It says that the kachei kachim was 20 by 20, which makes sense, but it was only 20 amas high. So this is shver. We had said that the Beis Hamikdash was 30 amas high. How are we saying that it was 20 amas high by the kachei kachim? It was counting from the top of the kruvim. In addition to the kruvim that were on top of the aron, there was also two kruvim that stood on the floor of the kachei kachim. Two, I don't know what other words there are. Cherubim, two figures, either like a baby with, I think it's normally translated as a baby with wings. So these kruvim were 10 amas high. So from the tips of their wings that were extended into the sky till the roof of the kachei kachim was 20 amas. Why would you decide to count the height of the roof from the top of the kruvim? Why didn't you just go from the floor? It's coming to tell you that underneath was just like on top of the kruvim. That if you would measure, if one were to measure the kruvim, they wouldn't take up any space. That certainly the kruvim were 10 amas high, and the entire height of the kachei kachim was 30 amas. But if you went with a tape measure and you measured from the bottom of where the tape measure from the floor to the top of the kruvim, it wouldn't show up as any space. We have Mesayer Mokum Aron Kruvim Eina Min Hamida. They were not measurable. It was a nace that they didn't take up any space when you measured. Tanya Namihachi Aron Shasa Moshe Yishli Rebach Eser Amas L'Chol Ruach. There were 10 amas in each direction. Even though, like we said, the kachei kachim was only 20 amas wide and 20 amas long, but the aron, if you measured from on each side, it would have 10 amas because the aron itself did not take up any space. It's a little hard to understand why we said from the kruvim, top of the kruvim, to the roof was 20 amas. If we said if you'd measure it, it wouldn't take up any space, so it should come out as 30. It's a little, I don't understand exactly how this nace worked. Amar Ravinoy Amar Shmuel. Kruvim b'neis heinaim. These kruvim it was a nace that they fit into the kachei kachim. Shnema v'chamish amas knafa kruva achas v'chamish amas knafa kruva shenis. Each wing of these, there were two kruvim, and each wing of each kruv was 5 amas long. Eser amas miksas knafa b'aksais knafa. Gufayu heicha havakaimi. So if it was 10 amas, there were two kruvim, and the two kruvim, each one had wings that were 5 amas each. So there was a total of 20 amas between the two kruvim. Where was there room for their bodies? Right, the wings came from the sides of their bodies, but the entire width of the aron of the base of the kachei kachim was 20 amas. You only had room for wings. You didn't have room for the kruv itself. El Shmamina b'nei Hinaim. Lamai, it's a raya that they didn't take up any space, and they were, even though each crew was more than 10 amas wide, there was still enough room for both of them in the kachi kachim. Maskav of Abaya v'Dilma Bolton Katarna Gailan have a kaimi. He said maybe the wings, these wings of the kruvim, maybe the wings came out of their backs like a tarnagol. That means it wasn't on each side of the guf, of the body, of the torso of the kruvim, but rather came out of the back, and the wings were joining one another. So they fit perfectly. There were two wings of 10 amas that were right next to each other. Rav asked a different question. How do you know that the two kruvim were wingtip to wingtip, one right next to each other? Maybe they were a little offset. So each one was, let's say, 15 amas, but one was like this, and one was like this. So they didn't take up an entire. It didn't take up more than 20 amas between the two of them. Maybe they were facing diagonally. They weren't. It's true that the width of the kachim was only 20 amas, but if the width is 20 amas, the diagonal is more than 20 amas. I don't know. Someone could quickly do the Pythagorean theorem and figure out exactly how much it is. That's pi, I think. No, I think it's something like 10 by 10 plus 10 by 10, and then you get 200, the square root of 200, whatever that is. Whatever times by itself. How much is 15 times? In any case, it's more than 20 amas. I'm sorry, it's not 100. It's not 10 by 10. It's 20 by 20. 400, 800. The square root of 800 would give you the diagonal of the kache kachim. Maskal of Huna Breder of Yeshua. The Dilma Besa Miloi. Ravach. What was that? Who is this? Maskal Yeshua Dilma Besa Miloi Ravach. Oh, right. Like we said before, maybe even though by the floor it was 20 by 20, but maybe like we said before, the walls, these are very large walls up. They go up, we said 30 amas. So maybe at the bottom, they were 20 amas apart, the walls, but then the walls got thinner as it got higher. And at the top, there were 5 extra amas. Maskul Papa Vadilma Makef have a kaifi yadayu. Papa says maybe they bent their wings; they weren't straight out. He said, "What is shlufi have mishlachpi?" Maybe they were sitting like this. Maybe their wings were not spread out, but maybe imagine their wings were facing toward each other, so they covered over. They were not 5 amas each way, but maybe 5 amas altogether because they both covering the same ground. One says the two kruvim were facing each other. And the other one said that their faces were toward the heichel. I'm not sure if it's pneim ish alachiv. I'm not sure why we had this whole problem of that the wings were outstretched, taking more than 20 amas, and they weren't. I know. I guess how did it work? Yeah, there were two kruvim. I think there were two kruvim facing each other, and their wings weren't covering the same ground. They weren't next to each other. It says the pasuk says, "Kamfei akruvim ela parshim amas esrim." Their faces were to the bias. The kasha kam as much yisrael oisim b'tzon shamakim, kam as much ein yisrael oisim b'tzon shamakim. meaning the Kruvim faced the Yidden at the time that the Yidden were doing the right thing. But if not, they turned to face toward each other. We have a second pasuk in Shemai Zoya Kruvim Parshik Nefayim Lamaila Soichim Bekanfeim Ala Kapiris Pneim Ishel Achiv Ala Kapiris Yu Pnei Kruvim says Ishel Achiv. The Mitzad Yatzdu, the Gemara says no, it doesn't mean that they were totally facing each other. It was partially a little bit turned toward each other, but generally they were faced toward the bias.
Why couldn't we give the same answer?
Sorry?
Why can't we give the previous answer? I
don't know.
I guess because that wouldn't be a good thing.
Yeah, but he said Lamanda Pneim Lebayis. He said he likes this. Why couldn't the other one give the teretz of Mitzad Yatzdi? You could really ask it that way as well. Yeah. The Tanya Oklos Hagar, I'm a Kruvim Maisit Satsuyim Hein. Or the Kruvim look like Maisit Satsuyim. How do they teach it? Maisit Satsuyim Pasuku Kruvim Divrei Yam Vulashon Satsuyim Kalamati Noikas. They look like children. And their faces were faced like a Talmud that's leaving his Rebbe. When a Talmud leaves his Rebbe, he's not supposed to turn around and show his back to his Rebbe. He also has to look where he's going. So when he goes, he backs away, but he keeps his face halfway so you can see where he's going. So that's the way the Kruvim was set up as well. So the Mishnah. Someone who has a bar that was used to get water from inside his friend's house, it'd come to that. He had sold him the bar, and he kept the rishos to get into the bar. If you have rights to go into someone's house to get water from a bar inside the other person's house, you can't go in the middle of the night. You can only come and go during normal daytime hours. He's not allowed to bring his animal into this person's house to drink. He has to take the water and bring it out to his animal. You can't abuse your rights to go into another person's house. They each get a key to this bar. The Gemara is going to explain why they each need a key. They lock the bar and they each get a key. So what is this lock for? They're both for the bar. So the bar. I understand why the owner of the bar gets a lock and a key, because it's his water. So he doesn't want the Baal Habar, the owner of the house, to steal from it. Why does the owner of the house have a key, have a second key with his own lock, that he could lock the owner of the bar from getting his water? The reason is we don't want the owner of the bar to come around when the person who owns the house, the balabais, is not there. It's not tznius. This guy's going to come waltzing into another person's house when he's away at work and his wife is there and I'm going to the bar. So therefore you give a key to the balabais also. So the balabar will never have an excuse to go there unless the balabais is there, because he's going to need him to unlock his lock as well. Someone who has a garden that's inside of his friend's garden, so he has to go through the other person's garden in order to get to his own. Again, he can only go during working hours. He can't bring inside of it peddlers. He has a right to go into his garden, but he can't do business in there. He also can't use it as a shortcut. If he has another field behind that garden, he could go through that field to get to his garden, but he can't use the garden, go through the other person's, his garden is trapped, and he can only get through it from his friend. He can't go through his friend and then go to his own garden, then go through there to get out to his fields. The person on the outside who is giving a path to his friend who has the inside garden, he can plant in the on the derech, on the path that the other person is allowed to walk on. The other person can't say, it makes it harder for me to walk. You know, he says you're allowed to walk here, but you can't stop me from planting them. If they both agree that rather than having a path that goes straight through the person on the outside's garden, they make up that it's going to be on the side by the border where it's nothing's really growing. In that case, since he's not going through the other person's garden, he's not interrupting him, so he can go whenever he wants. Because this is considered a more designated path. It's not just a easement to use the garden, but rather he's saying you have more rights. This is just for you to use as a path. He can bring in peddlers. However, he still can't use it as a shortcut because that's too much traffic within the other person's garden. And neither of them can plant there. If someone says, I'm selling you an irrigation ditch, he gets 2 amas for the actual irrigation ditch, another amma on each side, so he could build a container, like banks, to hold in the water. La'agfe, for the banks. Amma beis hakilan, if he makes not for irrigation, but rather just for personal, he buys a ditch that brings water for personal use. If it's not for irrigation, you don't need as much water, so you only need 1 amma for the ditch and a half amma for the banks. Who's allowed to plant there? He says the Bal Asada, the person who owns the rest of Sada, can plant them. He says he can plant trees on them. He says the one who says you could plant plants on it, certainly trees are less damaging to the banks. The planting will destroy the banks more than planting trees. Whoever, if the banks if the banks collapse, you can fix it from the dirt from that field. Because you know the banks collapsed into that field. How do you know that the dirt from that banks fell into the field? Maybe it got swept away by the water. The reason why you can take the dirt is because that's the t'nai. Originally, it's not that we know for sure that that's where the dirt went, but he has a right to take the dirt from the field because that was the original upmach. That was the original agreement.
Thank you.